Hello, I'm Sherda from Projector Sewing, and today I'm going to try to settle the debate over Inkscape versus Affinity Designer for sewing. I've used both Inkscape and Affinity Designer over the past few years for sewing and pattern alteration. By the end of this video, you can have a better idea of the differences between the two programs and which one is the right choice for you. What are these programs for and why do you need them for sewing? Well, sewing patterns are moving more and more away from paper to the digital realm, making them easily accessible to a larger pool of sewists. Additionally, sewing with a projector is a growing movement in the community. You can now completely leave behind the traditional paper pattern ways of cutting out and altering patterns. Digital vector graphics programs like Affinity Designer and Inkscape allow you to make digital pattern alterations, arrange pattern pieces, and optimize them for projector use. Now, before I delve into this topic, I'm wondering if you can help me out. I have a goal of reaching 5,000 subscribers. Can you hit that subscribe button and help me reach my goal? I really appreciate it. What is Inkscape? Inkscape is a free and open source vector graphics program. It is available for Windows, Mac, and Linux computers. Inkscape is a member of the Software Freedom Conservancy, a U.S. 501c3 nonprofit organization. Inside Inkscape, you can create drawings and manipulate vectors or lines. The default format is SVG, but you can import and export PDF pattern files along with several other different file types. The tools in Inkscape allow you to edit pattern lines, rearrange pattern layouts, and improve pattern files for projecting. What is Affinity Designer? Well, Affinity Designer is a professional-grade vector graphics editor with a user-friendly interface. It is available for Windows, Mac, and iPad. Affinity Designer can be purchased for a one-time fee after a free trial, and there is no subscription. If there is a major version update, for example from Affinity Designer 1 to Affinity Designer 2, you would need to purchase the update for access. But smaller updates in between major updates are provided completely free. Similar to Inkscape, you can create vector drawings, add graphics, and manipulate vectors. It has several file formats, including SVG and PDF. The tools in Affinity Designer also allow you to edit lines, rearrange pattern layouts, and improve pattern files for projecting. Inkscape versus Affinity Designer for sewing projects. So far, both Inkscape and Affinity Designer sound like similar vector graphics programs. Let's take a look at some of the differences for the sewing world. Cost. First is cost versus free. Inkscape is a free open source software, whereas Affinity Designer is a paid program for a one-time fee. Affinity Designer is about $20 for the iPad version or about $70 for the computer versions. Password protected files. Next, let's talk about dealing with password protected pattern files. Pattern designers are asked not to have passwords on projector file patterns. However, the reality is that many still do. For Affinity designers, this can be a hindrance to their workflow. While Inkscape completely ignores any password protections and opens the file anyway, Affinity Designer will ask for a password before opening the pattern file. This creates an extra step for Affinity Designer users, who will need to unlock the pattern first before making any pattern alterations. This can be done easily by running it through a third-party app. It is just an extra step. Now let's talk about layer files. Inkscape does not export multi-layered patterns. You need to export only one size visible at a time. If you are editing patterns for yourself or for one person, there really isn't a need to export more than one size at a time. For hobby sewists, this might not matter. Affinity Designer, on the other hand, does export multi-layered files. If you want to have several modifications to the same pattern that could be turned on and off, then Affinity Designer is the way to go. Also, if you ever consider selling patterns that you've created, then you will need to export stacked or layered or sized PDFs, which Inkscape just cannot do at this time. Stability. In the past, frequent crashing of Inkscape was a big hindrance to completing projects. In fact, this is one of the main factors of me switching from Inkscape to Affinity Designer in the early days of sewing with a projector. However, recent updates of Inkscape 1.4 have produced a much more stable product.
Oh, yeah!
But it can still crash on a routine basis. On the other hand, I rarely had Affinity Designer crash or slow down. Affinity Designer is more reliable in this regard. Now, if you haven't already, can you please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button? I have a goal of reaching 5,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. Thank you so much. Now, let's talk more about the differences between Inkscape and Affinity Designer. Responsiveness. Tagging on to stability is responsiveness of the program. After repeated use of both Inkscape and Affinity Designer, you will find that Affinity Designer is consistently more faster and more responsive to commands. However, to the average user, this may be barely noticeable. Text. For some reason, Inkscape has a difficult time with text features. Some patterns will not open well due to the text. It is important when opening patterns to use the Substitute Missing Fonts option in the Open dialog window. Some logos and text on patterns can cause Inkscape to slow down or crash altogether. Affinity Designer can handle fonts much easier and rarely will slow down or crash due to third-party fonts. Layer names import. Affinity Designer typically has a cleaner import of layers. The layers retain their names, and the objects within the layers are named things such as whole words like curve, text, or whatever the designer has named the individual objects. In Inkscape, usually the layer names and sizes will import, but there are the rare occasions that they don't, and they will just be a bunch of letters and numbers. The objects inside a layer in Inkscape are named with letters and numbers such as path 45, G for group 45, or text 45. Multiple documents at once. In Affinity Designer, you can have multiple documents open at once in the same window. Each document is opened up as a new tab in the same window. However, in Inkscape, you cannot open multiple documents in the same window. If you open another document, it will open a new application window. Having too many application windows open on Inkscape can slow the program down or even cause it to crash. Extra features. Some extra features are also different in these programs, but they're not really used for sewing. Inkscape has a trace bitmap, which is really great when making designs or when you need to trace an image. Affinity Designer does not have trace bitmap. Affinity Designer does have pixel design tools for working with images, whereas Inkscape is not really designed to work with images or pixels. Another extra feature that you're going to find in Inkscape is the Select Same feature. In Inkscape, this Select Same, you could choose the same fill and stroke. And this will not only select lines that are the same color, but the ones that have the same type of dash or spacing in the dashed lines. So again, that's Select Same, Fill and Stroke. And this is great for creating layers or groups on patterns that are not layered. However, in Affinity Designer, it does have the same Select Same feature, but it's slightly different. If I select a line and then I go to Select Same, the only option is to do the same fill and stroke color. It completely ignores the dashes and only looks at the color. It just doesn't work quite as well when you are trying to create layers in a non-layered pattern. So the Affinity Designer Select Same does not work as well as the Inkscape Select Same feature. So when should you choose Inkscape? Here are some reasons why you should choose Inkscape as your digital pattern alteration software. First, it's free. Those looking for something that is free to use can't go wrong with Inkscape. Sewing can be an expensive hobby. Sometimes we just don't want to spend money on another program. Linux users. If you are a Linux user, then Inkscape is the only way to go since Affinity Designer is not available for Linux. Hobby sewists. If you are a hobby sewist and do not need to export multi-layered patterns, then Inkscape is sufficient for you. Unless one of the following reasons apply about when to choose Affinity Designer. Well, here are 3 reasons why Affinity Designer might be the better choice. iPad users. Affinity Designer has an iPad version that works great. There is no such Inkscape app available. So if you have an iPad that you want to use for sewing, then Affinity Designer is definitely the way to go. Multi-layered PDF support. If you want to export multi-sized or layered PDFs, then Affinity Designer is the better choice over Inkscape. Stability. Finally, stability. If you are having issues with Inkscape crashing or are unable to complete projects uninterrupted, then it might be time to consider switching to Affinity Designer. Whether you learn to alter patterns in Inkscape or Affinity Designer, most of the skills you've learned will transfer over. You may need to learn a few new shortcuts and where things are located and done in the different program, but the concepts in both programs are the same. Both Inkscape and Affinity Designer can optimize patterns for Projector sewing, help to plan cutting layouts, and make pattern alterations. Inkscape is free and available on Windows, Mac, and Linux. Affinity Designer is a professional-grade software with a one-time fee. They do also offer a free trial if you want to try it out before committing. And I encourage you to give them both a try and see which you like working with better. And if I missed something about Inkscape or Affinity Designer in this video, feel free to add it in the comments. If you would like to learn more about Inkscape, I encourage watching this video about Inkscape. And if you want to learn more about Affinity Designer, then check out this video. I think you'll really enjoy them. Thank you so much for joining me today. And if you haven't already, hit that like and subscribe button so I can reach my goal of 5,000 subscribers. Thank you.